The rain had been steady all morning, drumming softly against the hospital windows. Inside the physical therapy wing, Robert Mitchell pushed his daughter Emma's wheelchair down the long hallway. Emma, once full of laughter and movement, now sat quietly, her gaze distant, her hands folded in her lap. Ever since the accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down, it was as if the brightness in her had dimmed. Robert tried to keep up a conversation, pointing out a painting on the wall, reminding her of a story from when she was little, but Emma only nodded faintly. He felt that heavy ache again, the helplessness of a father who could not fix what mattered most. When they reached the lobby, Robert paused to open his umbrella. The automatic doors slid apart and a gust of damp air rushed in. That was when Emma suddenly leaned forward, her eyes widening. "Dad," she whispered, "look." Out in the hospital courtyard, a boy around 12 years old was dancing in the rain. He had no coat, his shirt clung to his skinny frame, but his movements were fluid, almost magical. He leapt into a puddle, spun, and let the rain wash over him, as if the storm were music only he could hear. Emma's face lit up in a way Robert had not seen in months. She clapped her hands once, a small sound of delight breaking through her silence. "He's amazing," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Robert followed her gaze, surprised by her reaction. For the first time since the accident, her eyes were alive again. He looked back at the boy, who seemed lost in his own world, unaware that anyone was watching. As the rain poured harder, Emma leaned toward the glass. "Can we go closer, Dad, please?" Robert hesitated. He had seen her discouraged so often, and now here she was, captivated, hopeful. Something in him stirred, a quiet thought he had not felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this boy was about to change everything. Robert guided Emma's wheelchair closer to the glass doors. The rain was steady now, falling in silver sheets, but the boy didn't seem to mind. His bare feet splashed in the puddles as he twirled, his arms moving with a rhythm that felt both playful and heartbreakingly graceful. Emma pressed her hands against the glass. "Can we talk to him, just for a minute?" Her voice carried a spark of eagerness Robert had almost forgotten existed. Robert hesitated only a second before nodding. He pushed the wheelchair outside under the wide hospital awning. The boy noticed them now. His movements slowed, his eyes narrowing with a kind of wariness no child his age should have carried. "Hey there," Robert called gently, raising his hand in a calm wave. "That was some pretty incredible dancing." The boy froze, his shoulders tightened as if preparing to run. "I wasn't bothering anyone," he said quickly, his voice sharp with fear. "You weren't," Robert assured him. "Not at all. You made her smile." He placed a hand on Emma's shoulder and Emma leaned forward. "You're really good," she said softly. "What's your name?" The boy shifted from one foot to the other. "Tommy," he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. His wet hair stuck to his forehead and his thin frame shook from the chill. Emma smiled. "I'm Emma. You made my day better." For a moment Tommy's expression softened, but then his eyes darted toward Robert. "You're not from Child Services, are you?" he asked in a trembling voice. Robert frowned, caught off guard. "No, I'm not. Why would you think that?" Tommy backed away a step. "Because they come looking. They say they want to help, but they don't. They send you to the bad places." Before Robert could ask more, Tommy turned and bolted across the wet courtyard, slipping between the hedges and vanishing into the rain. Emma gasped, disappointed, her hand reaching out toward where he had disappeared. "Dad, wait, he's scared." Robert stood in the rain, heart heavy, watching the boy vanish. Something about those frightened words clung to him. The way Tommy looked over his shoulder, the fear of being taken away. He knelt beside Emma's chair, lowering his voice. "We'll see him again," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I have a feeling this isn't the last time." The rain had eased by the next morning, but Robert could not shake the image of the boy bolting into the storm. Over breakfast, Emma kept talking about him, her words tumbling with rare excitement. "Dad, you saw the way he moved. He wasn't just dancing, it was like he was free." Robert listened quietly, stirring his coffee, his thoughts elsewhere. The boy's fear when he mentioned Child Services had unsettled him. Children did not talk like that unless they had lived through something hard. Later that day, while Emma was in her therapy session, Robert found himself walking back through the hospital lobby. He asked the receptionist, almost casually, if she knew anything about the boy who sometimes lingered outside. She shook her head, but mentioned a nurse might have seen him around the paediatric wing. The nurse, an older woman with kind eyes, remembered him. "That boy comes by often," she said softly. "He's been on his own since his mother passed." Poor woman, Sarah Bennett was her name. She struggled with memory loss toward the end. The name hit Robert like a sudden gust of wind. Sarah Bennett. He hadn't heard it spoken in years, yet it stirred a flood of memories. The laughter of a young woman under autumn leaves, the letters they exchanged when life was simpler, and then the silence when their paths had split. "Sarah?" he asked carefully, his throat dry. "You're certain?" The nurse nodded. "Yes. She passed 2 years ago. The boy, he never talks much about it, but you can see how lost he is. Some neighbours said she used to call out for someone named Robert near the end. None of us knew who she meant." Robert's chest tightened. He thanked her, forcing himself to keep his composure until he stepped outside. The air felt heavy, thick with questions. Could it be, after all these years? When he returned to Emma, she immediately noticed his expression. "Dad, what is it?" He knelt beside her wheelchair, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The boy's mother. I knew her a long time ago." Emma's eyes widened. "You mean Tommy?" Robert nodded slowly, his heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and guilt. "Yes, and if what I've just learned is true, then this is only the beginning of something I should have faced long ago." The next afternoon, Robert drove to the small neighbourhood where Sarah had once lived. The streets were quiet, lined with modest houses that carried the weight of years. It was not the kind of place where time moved fast. It was the kind of place where neighbours remembered everything. He stopped in front of a faded blue house, its shutters worn, the garden overgrown. A woman in her late 60s stepped onto the porch with a laundry basket in her arms. When she noticed him lingering by the gate, she tilted her head. "Can I help you?" she asked. Robert cleared his throat. "I'm looking for someone who used to live here, Sarah Bennett. She was a friend of mine." The woman's eyes softened at the name. She set the basket down and walked closer. "Sarah lived here until the very end. Sweet soul, though her mind betrayed her. I tried to check on her as often as I could." There was a pause, then she glanced back toward the house. "I still have something of hers. I never knew what to do with it." Curious, Robert followed her inside. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. She pulled a small box from a shelf and placed it on the table. "She gave me this years ago, said it was important. Letters she had written but never managed to send." Robert's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside were envelopes, each one with his name written in familiar handwriting that he had not seen in decades. The ink was faded, but the letters were unmistakable. He unfolded the first one carefully. "Robert, if you're reading this, then I hope you still remember me. I wish I could tell you everything in person, but life has been hard. I have a son now. His name is Tommy." The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears. Letter after letter, Sarah had tried to reach him, explaining her struggles, her illness, and her desire for him to know the truth. None had ever found their way into his hands. Robert pressed the letters to his chest, his heart aching with both regret and tenderness. He had not been there for her. He had not been there for Tommy. The woman touched his arm gently. "She always believed you would come back one day. Near the end, when her memory slipped, she still called your name. It was the last thing I heard her say." Robert closed his eyes, the weight of years pressing down on him. When he opened them again, there was only one thought clear in his mind. He could not let Tommy slip through the cracks of the world the way Sarah had. As he left the house with the letters clutched tightly in his hand, the setting sun cast long shadows on the street. For the first time in a long time, Robert felt both broken and determined. The boy deserved to know the truth, and he would be the one to tell him. The rain had returned by the weekend, soft and steady, tapping against the hospital windows as Emma finished her therapy session. She was quieter than usual, her eyes drifting toward the courtyard, as if hoping to see the boy again. Robert stood nearby, the letters from Sarah tucked safely inside his jacket. He had read them all, each one a reminder of what she had endured alone, each one a plea for him to know their son. The guilt gnawed at him, but it also gave him clarity. He could not let Tommy disappear into the shadows of foster homes and forgotten corners. When the session ended, Robert wheeled Emma outside under the hospital awning. To his surprise, Tommy was there again, crouched by the hedge, his clothes damp, his face pale. He looked ready to bolt the moment he noticed them. Robert lifted his hands slightly, palms open. "Tommy," he said softly, "we just want to talk. No one's here to take you anywhere." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "Please don't run this time. You can sit with us if you want. We even brought sandwiches." She reached for the small lunch bag in her lap, unzipping it with a hopeful smile. The boy's eyes flickered toward the food, then back at Robert. His stomach gave a faint growl that he seemed embarrassed by. Slowly, hesitantly, he stepped closer, stopping just short of the awning. The rain dripped from his hair onto the pavement. Robert held out the bag. "Turkey and cheese, nothing fancy, you're welcome to it." Tommy grabbed the sandwich quickly, as if afraid someone might change their mind. He unwrapped it and took a cautious bite, his eyes never leaving Robert. Emma clapped her hands softly. "See? I told you we'd share. And maybe, if you want, you can show me how you danced the other day." For the first time, Tommy's expression softened. He glanced at Emma, then down at her wheelchair, and something unspoken passed across his face. A recognition of pain, perhaps, or the courage it took for her to smile at him anyway. He swallowed hard, then mumbled, "Maybe." It wasn't much, but to Robert it felt like a door finally creaking open. He crouched to meet Tommy's eyes. "You don't have to trust me today," he said gently, "but I promise you this, I'm not going to stop showing up." The boy studied him for a long moment, his fingers tightening around the sandwich. Then, for the briefest second, Robert thought he saw the walls around him lower, just a little. Emma's laughter broke the silence, light and hopeful. And for the first time, Tommy did not run. Over the next few days, Tommy began showing up more often. Sometimes he would linger near the hospital steps, sometimes by the courtyard, always hovering as if one wrong move might send him running again. Robert made sure never to push too hard. A sandwich here, a bottle of water there, quiet conversations that asked for nothing in return. Emma became the bridge between them. She would ask him about his favourite songs, his favourite foods, or tease him into showing her a few dance steps. Tommy remained guarded, but each time he came back, the distance between them seemed a little smaller. Still, Robert could not ignore the letters in his drawer at home, or the memories that kept replaying in his mind. Sarah's words were clear. "I have a son now. His name is Tommy." He needed to know the truth, not just for himself, but for the boy who deserved answers. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Robert sat at the kitchen table staring at his phone. His lawyer had given him the number of a clinic that handled paternity tests discreetly. His hands shook as he dialed. The next day, he persuaded Tommy to come with him, promising nothing more than a checkup to make sure he was healthy. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and quiet nerves. Tommy eyed the nurse suspiciously as she swabbed the inside of his cheek, then did the same for Robert. "What's this for?" he asked, his voice low. Robert hesitated, then crouched to his level. "It's just to see how close we might be," he said softly. "Sometimes family shows up in ways we never expect." Tommy looked away, chewing his lip, but he didn't resist. The wait for results felt endless. Robert spent nights pacing, rereading Sarah's letters, wondering how many moments he had lost. When the call finally came, his breath caught in his throat as the words echoed through the receiver. "Mr. Mitchell, the test shows a biological match. The boy is your son." Robert closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. A flood of emotions surged through him, relief, sorrow, joy, regret, all at once. He had found his son, but far too late to share the years already gone. That evening, he returned to Emma and Tommy, who were sitting together on the porch, sharing a bag of chips. Emma looked up with a grin. "Dad, he was teaching me how to clap to the beat. We're going to dance together one day, you'll see." Robert sat beside them, studying the boy's profile, the familiar curve of his jaw, the spark in his eyes that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. He wanted to say the truth right then, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he reached out, resting a hand lightly on Tommy's shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, and for the first time, Tommy didn't flinch. Days passed, and Robert knew he could not keep the truth hidden much longer. He spent late nights at his desk, the letters from Sarah spread out before him like fragile pieces of a puzzle he had finally solved. Every word reminded him of how much she had fought to connect him with the boy, and how easily those cries for help had been lost in the shuffle of life. He owed it to her and to Tommy to make things right. One morning, after dropping Emma off at therapy, Robert walked into the Office of Child Services with a folder tucked under his arm. Inside were the test results, Sarah's letters, and his own petition for custody. He spoke with steady determination as he handed everything across the desk to a caseworker. The woman behind the desk, Ms. Clark, looked through the documents carefully. Her expression was neutral, almost guarded. "Mr. Mitchell, I see what you're presenting here, but you must understand this isn't as simple as proving paternity. Children in foster care have routines, systems in place. We can't just hand him over because you showed up with papers." Robert leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here because of papers. I'm here because I found my son, and I want to give him a home. He deserves stability, not to be shuffled from house to house." Miss Clark studied him for a long moment. "And you? You're a businessman. People like you have demanding schedules, constant responsibilities. How do I know you won't treat him like a side project? Children need more than resources, they need presence." Her words stung, mostly because they were not entirely untrue. Robert had built his life around boardrooms and deadlines, but when he pictured Tommy's thin frame, his guarded eyes, and Emma's laughter when she was with him, he knew there was no comparison. "I'll make the time," he said quietly, "no matter what it takes." Ms. Clark finally set the file aside. "For now, we can consider temporary supervised visits. It will give us time to evaluate. But please understand, if we see any reason to believe this arrangement isn't in the boy's best interest, custody will not move forward." Robert nodded, though inside his chest tightened. He walked out of the building into the cool air, his thoughts heavy. Temporary visits, conditions, doubt. He had expected obstacles, but hearing the skepticism spoken aloud reminded him that this fight was far from over. That evening, as he told Emma the news, her face fell. "Supervised visits? That doesn't sound fair. He's your son." Robert sat beside her, resting a hand on her arm. "Fair or not, it's the way it has to begin. We'll take it one step at a time. What matters is that Tommy knows we're not going anywhere." Emma looked toward the porch, where Tommy was fiddling with an old radio, humming along to a tune. Her eyes softened. "Then we'll show them what family looks like." Robert followed her gaze, his jaw set. The system might doubt him, the world might test him, but he would not back down, not now, not when both of his children were counting on him. The first supervised visits went better than Robert had expected. A caseworker sat in the corner with a clipboard, but Tommy seemed to forget her presence when Emma coaxed him into showing her the rhythm of his dance steps. Robert watched with quiet pride, though the weight of proving himself to the system pressed heavily on his shoulders. Still, not everyone shared his determination. When Robert's mother, Catherine, came by for dinner one evening, she noticed Tommy sitting at the table with Emma, laughing over a plate of spaghetti. Her expression stiffened. "Robert," she said once the children stepped outside to feed the dog, "you cannot be serious about this, bringing a strange boy into our family. Do you even know what kind of trouble follows children from that world?" Robert set down his fork, his patience tested. "He's not a stranger, Mother. He's my son." Catherine's lips tightened. "So you claim, but think about appearances, about stability. Emma already needs so much from you. And now you want to take on a boy with no upbringing, no guidance, no bloodline we can trust." Her words struck deep, sharper than he expected. He remembered the letters, Sarah's pleas, the truth written in every faded line of ink. "He is my bloodline," Robert said firmly, "and he deserves the same love Emma has." Before Catherine could reply, the sound of laughter drifted in from the porch. Emma and Tommy were tossing a ball back and forth, their voices bright and free. For a moment, even Catherine faltered, her eyes softening at the sight. But later, after she left, Robert received another blow. His cousin Bradley called out of the blue, his tone slick and casual. "I heard you're stirring up quite the storm, cousin," trying to play father to a foster kid, parading him around like some miracle. Robert gripped the phone tightly. "Stay out of this, Bradley." Bradley chuckled darkly. "Oh, I'm not in it. But Child Services listens to reports, you know. All it takes is the right word from the right person, and suddenly you're not the hero, but the fool who tried to bend the rules." The line went dead, leaving Robert staring at the silence, anger rising in his chest. He had always known Bradley's jealousy ran deep, but now it was clear. His cousin would not hesitate to use the system against him. That night, as Robert checked on Emma and Tommy sleeping peacefully under the same roof, he felt both the fragility and the strength of what they were building. Love was growing here, undeniable and real. But outside forces, family, jealousy, and the system itself were closing in, and Robert knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The call came on a grey morning. Child Services had decided to move forward with a hearing. Robert would need to stand before a judge and prove not only his connection to Tommy, but his ability to provide a home where the boy would be safe. When Robert shared the news with Emma, she immediately sat taller in her chair. "Then I'm going with you," she said with determination. "They need to hear what Tommy means to us." The day of the hearing, the courtroom was hushed and cold. Robert sat at the front table with his attorney, while Tommy sat beside Emma, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. Across the aisle, Bradley appeared with a smug smile, his presence confirming what Robert had feared. His cousin had fueled this storm. The caseworker, Ms. Clark, took the stand first. She spoke evenly about her observations. Tommy was adjusting, Emma clearly benefited from his presence, but questions remained about Robert's availability as a parent. Her tone was cautious but not unkind. Then Bradley was called. His words dripped with poison, carefully wrapped in concern. "I only want what's best for the boy," he said smoothly. But Robert has never been the type to put family first. His life is business deals, late nights, charity events. How can a man like that raise a troubled child? Robert's jaw clenched as he listened. The lawyer rose, sliding forward the letters from Sarah and the results of the test. The evidence was placed before the judge, proof that Tommy was not just any child but Robert's own flesh and blood. Finally, Emma asked to speak. The courtroom hesitated at first, but the judge nodded gently, allowing her to roll forward. She looked small behind the witness stand, but her voice was steady. "Your Honour," she began, "I lost more than just the use of my legs in that accident. I lost hope. For months I couldn't smile, couldn't laugh. But the first time I saw Tommy dance, I felt alive again. He's not just my brother by blood, he's my brother because he gave me back a reason to try." Her words hung in the air, raw and unpolished, but undeniably true. Even Miss Clark's expression softened as she wrote her notes. When Robert finally took the stand, he did not speak like a businessman defending his record. He spoke like a father who had been given a second chance. He admitted his regrets, the years lost, the mistakes of the past. And then he looked directly at the judge. "All I'm asking for," he said quietly, "is the chance to love my son the way I should have from the beginning. I will fight every day to give him the home his mother wanted for him." Silence filled the room as the judge leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. The decision would not come until the next day, but in that moment, Robert felt something shift. He saw it in Emma's proud eyes, in Tommy's hesitant but hopeful glance, and even in the faint tremor that passed through Bradley's confident mask. The battle was not over, but the truth had finally been spoken where it mattered most. The next morning, the courthouse was filled with a quiet tension. Robert sat at the front with Emma by his side, her hand resting lightly on the wheel of her chair. Tommy sat close, chewing his lip, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He looked so small against the weight of the walls and the people who would decide his future. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The room fell silent as he opened the file and spoke slowly, his voice carrying authority, but also a trace of compassion. "This case has reminded us of what is most important," the judge began. "Not appearances, not wealth, not even blood alone, but the love and stability a child is given." He paused, glancing toward Robert. "Mr. Mitchell, the court recognizes your biological connection to the boy." More importantly, it recognises the bond that has already formed between you, your daughter, and Tommy. The petition for custody is granted. For a moment, Robert could not breathe. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then Emma let out a cry of joy, her arms wrapping around Tommy as tears streamed down her cheeks. Tommy stood frozen, wide-eyed, before finally turning to Robert. Slowly, almost shyly, he stepped forward and pressed himself into his father's embrace. Robert held him tightly, his voice breaking. "I've got you, son. I'll never let you go again." Even the caseworker, who had been so measured and careful, allowed herself a small smile. Bradley stormed out of the room, his bitterness trailing behind him like smoke. Catherine, who had come reluctantly to witness the decision, stayed seated longer than the rest. She watched the three of them huddled together, and for the first time her stern features softened. She rose quietly and left without a word, but something in her eyes suggested a shift, however small. That evening, back at the house, Emma insisted they eat dinner together at the kitchen table. It was messy, filled with laughter, with Tommy trying to tell stories between mouthfuls of food, and Emma teasing him about his clumsy way of describing things. Robert sat back, letting their voices wash over him, every sound a reminder that this was no longer a house echoing with silence, it was a home. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold, Emma asked Tommy to show her one more dance step. He hesitated at first, glancing at her wheelchair, but she grinned. "Don't worry, I'll follow your lead from right here." Tommy laughed, and together they clapped to the rhythm, her hands tapping against her lap as he moved lightly across the porch. Robert stood in the doorway, his chest full, his eyes wet. Above them the wind rustled the trees, and for a fleeting moment he thought of Sarah. He hoped she could see this, the daughter she had never met, the son they had both brought into the world, and the family finally pieced back together. He whispered into the fading light, "We're whole now. I promise I'll take care of them both." And in that quiet, ordinary evening, surrounded by the laughter of his children, Robert felt what he had been missing all along. Not success, not recognition, just family. Family is not defined only by time or appearances, but by love, commitment, and the courage to show up when it matters most. It's never too late to open your heart and choose to be there for the people who need you. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. I truly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to support the channel. I'll see you again in the next story here on Rain Inside.